Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at Talking Business. Today is going to be a very special and very important day, primarily because it's about, and what I think many of us don't even realize, our government is a business too. And we are on the cusp of an election, a very important election, and our two guests are here to break down what we're voting for. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Florida State Senator and now with the new Florida majority, Dwight Bullard. Thank you for joining us. And then we have Katia with KSF and Associates. So they are the election gurus, and we're going to get right into the meat of this because I believe Katia has to leave us early, and we want to make sure we hear what we need to hear as we go into the polls tomorrow. I kind of spoke to you a little bit earlier, Senator, about sort of I guess it's what I call global politician speak. There are all these words floating out there that many of us don't even really know what it means. And so when we go into the voting booths, we don't know how it impacts us individually. And since both of you really specialize on educating, in particular communities with low voting histories, talk to us a little bit about what we should know and what we should be thinking about and considering when we're in the polls making those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important issue. One thing I would start out with is that, once tomorrow happens, once Tuesday happens and you cast your vote and these folks are elected, I'm of the belief that it's not incumbent on you as the individual to try and make the language specific or easy for them to understand. I think it's the other way around, right? You asking your question, there should be somebody in their office that's able to translate the most simple and mundane. The whole old adage, there's no such thing as a silly question. Mm-hmm. I think that's critically important. But where we are right now, what you're going into the voting booth kind of hoping to understand, or we want you to understand, is that that casting that vote, the person who wins this election, there are layers, right, and on the way that they're going to potentially impact you. And I think a lot of people kind of get lost too often in this kind of individualized mindset. Like they think, okay, well, I'm a single issue voter, so I think about my taxes or my stance on pro-life versus pro-choice or some of those things. And so there's nuances to all these folks, but for us at the New Florida Majority, we're constantly pushing the notion of collective liberation, right? And it's not to sound flowery, right? But there's no point in your business flourishing if the people that are supposed to be supporting that business are in pain and struggle. There's no reason why, you can't talk about your high achieving son or daughter at a school if you're not really worrying about school safety, mental health, teacher salaries, and things of that nature, because that means the conditions that create a good educational system aren't in place, despite how well your family may be doing it individually. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully those questions have been answered over this journey. If they have not, at this point, I definitely encourage you to either reach out to folks like myself or Katia to kind of walk you through it, because I think what unfortunately happens with a lot of folks, especially Black folks, people of color, is there's an anxiousness, there's an anxiety that comes with voting, because you feel as though you don't know who or what you're voting for any number of reasons. So, I'm here to walk you through it if you still got concerns 24 hours ahead of the election.
Katia, any?
Absolutely. I'd like to echo everything that Senator Bullard said. But in addition to that, I'd like people to know, I hear a lot of times, my one vote doesn't matter, right? My vote doesn't matter, it's rigged. Listen, that's what they want us to believe, right? If your vote didn't matter, there wouldn't be such an effort to ensure that you didn't vote. If your vote didn't matter, there wouldn't be people at polling sites trying to intimidate Black voters. If your vote didn't matter, there wouldn't be legislators that every year go up to Tallahassee to try to make laws to make it harder for us to vote. The other thing that's actually becoming more and more prevalent as we get closer to tomorrow is that, truthfully and honestly, the soul of this nation is on the ballot. I live in Miami. I go down the street on 36 Midtown and stores are boarded up.
Yeah.
Stores are boarded up because people do not know what the reaction is going to be based on who wins this election. Never in the history of our country has that been an issue in modern day society where we are afraid of election results. People have to really think about that. That is not something that we should take lightly. So when you hear people say, voter, like vote or die, vote like your life depend on it, I'm constantly saying the soul of a nation is at stake here. But when you have stores boarding up, preparing for what they are deeming to be a race war, like that's real.
Right.
Like that is no longer something that's happening in theory. That is no longer a bunch of folks waving red flags. This is happening. People are boarding up. People are afraid, and they don't know what to do. So when we think about just our day-to-day life, when we think about our safety, that's crucial, right? Education is on the ballot. Our lives are on the ballot. Healthcare is on the ballot. If you're a woman, your own personal choice on what to do with your body is on the ballot. I do a lot of outreach for Caribbean and Haitian communities, and folks are always asking, well, what's important to the Caribbean community, right? Listen, the Caribbean community is like the Black community. We are all the same.
Right. They're not
important to every American are important to the Black voter. We want to make sure that our kids are safe when they leave. I want to make sure that kids have good education. I want to make sure that people have access to education. I want to make sure that people are able to make a living wage. We want to make sure that people will continue to be able to purchase homes where they want to purchase homes. People will be able to, that is on the ballot, believe it or not. These are things that will be seen in front of the Supreme Court justice very soon. The ability for banks to give you a loan, right? And not discriminate on the base of your skin color. Like all of those things are on the ballot. And I usually have more energy than this, but we are at the final stretch. The thing that I want to tell everybody, if you already voted, please reach out to everyone you know and get them out. There's this misconception that Black people don't vote. We don't vote on election day. I think that's a lie. We are seeing people of color standing in line, standing in the rain, voting at a level that is unseen. So not allow people to say that we did not vote. But not only is it important that we vote, it's important that we reach out to everyone that we know to make sure that they vote. And if they haven't voted, figure out if they need a ride, figure out if they need assistance, ask them questions. Like Dwight said, you guys can call. I mean, you can call me. I'm not ashamed. You can hit me up on Instagram, Facebook. I am my name on all social media platforms. If you have questions, if you have any needs, like this is so crucial for our community. This is so crucial for our state, and it's crucial for our nation. Like people are boarding up because they're afraid of what the results can be. And that's so, I just don't even know how to express. Like I saw pictures of it just before I got on here. So that's why I sound like this. Like people, we got to do better. We are better than this.
Right. But let me ask this question then. When you're talking about sort of, we need to think a little more globally when we go into the election booth or into the booth. How do you combat, I think you both know we've had some, rappers that have come out who have really had these mantras of, I need y'all all to vote because it's going to have an impact on me. I think we even had one rapper that asked Joe Biden, what are you going to do for me personally? How do you combat that?
Early for that question.
I'm starting some stuff. Like, how do you combat that though? Because there's somebody with a microphone. Say what happened? Hello, I lost you.
Katia froze up a little bit. I would start by saying rappers aren't leaders. Like let's start there, right? Like, and I was watching a brother who recently pointed out is like, as much as we have an affinity for rappers, singers, entertainers, etc., ask yourself this fundamental question: is that if you were, going through your daily life, you were going to the dentist, you were going to the deli at the grocery store, you were getting on a bus to go somewhere, and you saw, quote unquote, your favorite rapper in the driver's seat or behind the counter. Would you trust them? Would you trust them to cut your turkey at Publix? Okay? So if you're not going to trust them to cut your turkey at Publix, then you shouldn't be out here like, you know what? You sound like a great advocate for these important things. I mean, just to give a comparison, right? Because we talk about this platinum plan, and this is the problem with folks not really taking ownership and agency of kind of their own trajectory. The Trump platinum plan versus the lift every voice plan that Joe Biden has proposed. And I'm not trying to endorse either candidate, but one plan is 2 pages and one plan is 48 pages.
Let's just
right?
right.
Let's put it out there, right? Like one plan is literally talking points and bullet points of I'm gonna do this. So it's basically, and you just think about that in like, especially with Black folks, right? Do you trust the person who's like, don't listen, I got you, dog. You just give me $200, I'm gonna flip it. 10 days later, it's gonna be $2,000. I promise you. Or do you want somebody who's like, I'm gonna take your $200, I'm gonna do boom, 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 and boom, and then 18 months later, it's going to increase by this percentage or whatever the case may be. That's the differentiation. Mm-hmm. And if you're okay with the internet Ponzi scheme, and as that worked for you, then you know where you got to go. But for the 99.9% of us who aren't out here trying to get taken, you want to actually pay attention to what somebody may do. And that's the reality of investments anyway, right? Is like, it may or may not happen, but at least walk me through the process. And I think too often, and I get it, there's a lack of trust within our community. There's a disdain around how we've been treated in the past by both parties. And I understand that completely. But that's why we're advocating for, again, agency over your own vote. Mm-hmm. This is not a beauty contest. This is not a contest to pick your favorite girl. This is not The Voice. This is not any of those things. This is an assertion of your individual power, right? Your ability to be, to hold a system accountable that in the past has exploited people of color across the board. And I always, I have to say this now because it's been on my heart for a while. Like, there has been a time and place where Black people have not been able to vote, right? And we know what happened to us when we did not have access to the ballot box. Like, there's a whole history of that, right? It's called enslavement, it's called Jim Crow, it's called all these things. So the idea of Black people voluntarily giving up their right to vote by saying it doesn't matter or it won't matter. Like, listen, we know what it's like if all of us choose not to vote or all of us can't vote. Right. So why would you advocate for not voting for an entire community that has a written, documented history of what happens to us when we're not allowed to vote? It's crazy to me that's the case. But I want to get people out that habit swiftly.
Right. Exactly.
Hey.
You want to add, Katia?
No, he said swiftly. I said, no, we need to get them out the habit today.
Today, because we need you tomorrow. I mean, would you talk about an economy? Minimum wage is on the ballot at this point, and we as a community are disproportionately affected by that. So again, I guess I agree. I find it a little crazy when you're looking at how the business of this election will affect us individually. Still doesn't really rally folks to understand that minimum wage now impacts what you can bring into your household and therefore be able to put back into the economy. What have you been sharing with the people that you're talking to about how this vote for minimum wage and who are the people that can really ensure that happens? What are those conversations you've been having with your audience?
Well, I'll start by simply saying that, again, read the bill, right? Like, or read the amendment. It's not, everyone's like, it's $15 minimum wage. That means like, as soon as I vote for it. So people are always under the impression that once you cast a vote, like 24 hours later, it takes action, and that's it, right? In the case of the minimum wage amendment, we're talking about a structured minimum wage that increases $1 a year over the course of 5 years, right? So even when I'm talking to small business folks who are just like, I can't afford to do this, it's like, think about this in terms of pragmatism. I get it. It's easy to say I can run a small business when you're paying people $8.46 an hour, but what does that translate to in terms of their livelihood, right? So if you have somebody who's scooping ice cream for you, are you comfortable with the idea that they're working for you but cannot afford to literally buy the ice cream that they're selling?
Right.
Because they don't have the freedom or flexibility in their income to do so. So I understand the challenges, and I empathize with folks, but I also want to remind folks again, it elevates to $10 in September, and then subsequently every year goes up by $1.
Okay.
So for you as a small business owner, the same way you're preparing, the same way you're thinking about, the same way you now have to think about the potential of a pandemic impacting your business long term, you now have the flexibility to figure out how you go about maintaining the growth model of your business under the umbrella of this new amendment. And I would just remind folks, vote for it. Like if you're not comfortable with $8.46 an hour as a minimum wage, which no one should be, you should definitely support amendment.
I agree. I think, and that has been in my conversations with small businesses, that is a concern. So, I'm intrigued to know, once this passes, and I do hope it does, what happens or what goes into place, not just from a legislative point of view, but what's going to happen on the ground to help small businesses really prepare for the incremental increases. Has there been any talk about that at this point? Katia, would you like to chime in?
No, we haven't. Once it passes, it has to then go through the legislature, and then they make decisions on how they're going to implement it. And we won't know what that's going to look like until after the elections.
Okay. All right. So at that point is when you'll start diving.
But I mean, like Dwight said, it becomes $10 an hour, and it's a $1 incremental change from then. So it's not an overnight, you'll have to start paying folks $15 an hour, or they'll be making $15 an hour. You'll start making $10 an hour September of next year, and then it increases $1 every year till 2026, where it reaches the $15.
Okay. So I was saying earlier to you, Senator, that again, we go back to the global speak. There's all this conversation about the GDP. I don't really know what that means. So, I mean, I get a general sense. It just seems to adjust its meaning based on the administration, because it seems, we've attached GDP under this administration to stocks, and that doesn't mean what I think it's supposed to mean. It's definitely supposed to be more economic. So can you bring that down to a regular?
Yeah. If we're gonna get 100 and be unapologetically Black in this space,
right?
I'm gonna do that.
Good.
Okay. Here is that we, as a community, have to stop attributing economic growth to a model that's created by folks who would have no problem re-enslaving you, right? Like you got to think about gross domestic product. You got to think about the growth of the economy in that context, that when Black people were enslaved, you had people that were making extreme levels of wealth, right? Based on the labor and productivity of people that were being treated as property. Systematically, that hasn't, and fundamentally, that hasn't changed, right? You're still talking about kind of general exploitation and maintenance of a system that keeps people at bay, right? When we think about a minimum wage, you got to understand like that calculation and how it's separated over time from what it was truly meant to do, right? The minimum wage was instituted was, what's the minimum amount of money that someone can make in order to survive, right? Like it used to factor in the things like cost of living, entertainment cost, etc. we've gone away from that since the late 70s, right? And so now we have people making this minimum wage, and then people getting on television saying, well, that those are folks who are doing supplemental income. Those are people that are, blah, 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 and making up all this other stuff. For Black folks, no, it's like we got people out in the community that are making that money in hopes of feeding their children, in hopes of keeping a roof over their heads. And so that shouldn't be a calculation. The unfortunate reality is that if we actually calculated economy based on, conditions of living, we'd all be pretty disappointed in how in the productivity of the economy. But we definitely cannot continue to say, well, the stock market is doing fine, so the economy is doing fine.
Right, exactly.
Especially if we're going to attribute that when the economy gets a cold and Black people get the flu, and we know this to be like a common theme, right? That like first, last hired, first fired. Like these are some of the things that we've learned as a community to unfortunately accept, and we shouldn't. You know what I'm saying? Like it's toxic for us as Black people to continue to accept the notion that we're always going to have to, be on the fringes or on the lower rungs of society economically. We have to urge folks that are elected, and kind of bringing it full circle back to the voting thing, is that if we're not engaging people to make our material conditions better, then we're failing. And the example I would give is that when you think about names like Ford or Chevrolet or Hershey's, and these are companies that we've known for a while, but when America got in crisis situations, they went to the US government and basically made themselves richer, tenfold. Like Hershey, I was watching a documentary, and that's what COVID does, right? I was watching a documentary on basically how Hershey's during the Great Depression sold itself as a nutritious option, right, to Americans who could not afford to get actual food anymore, right? Wow. So they would make the case that by putting chocolate and peanuts together, that was a nutritious enough option for you to bypass having a meal over the course of your day, and you could do it for a nickel. So companies like Hershey's and Mars became multi-million-dollar industries, literally off the exploitation of people who could not afford anything other than candy bars, right? And again, whether you view that good or bad, or you think that's a genius business move or not, oftentimes people of color, Black people especially, are left out of that conversation. And we're not thinking of how to take this moment to capitalize economically on how to grow our industries, grow our businesses, and keep ourselves flourishing. Instead, we kind of sit there and say, well, let's keep the status quo and hope everything gets better.
Or it's our first time into that foray of some level of wealth, and out of fear, let's just hold on to everything we got. So make some decisions accordingly. Katia, your thoughts around that as well?
I don't know. When Dwight said that, it brought me back to the rappers and the celebrities that are speaking for Black people, but that are very disassociated with what it is like to live that everyday life of a Black person, right? They're making economic arguments. They're making economic arguments that don't even, I would say they don't even apply to most Black people, but they don't apply to 99.9% of the population, right? So when we talk about voting and we talk about disparities in the Black community, I think that a lot of times folks are apathetic towards voting, right? Because they are working two jobs, because they only make $8.46 an hour, trying to put their pennies together, trying to work overtime, trying to do whatever it takes to be able to take care of their families. And those are the folks who are coming and they're saying, I don't have time to vote. Like, I don't have time to think about these issues. When they have downtime, they're not watching CNN. They're not watching MSNBC. They're not watching Fox News. They're busy working, trying to take care of their families. What I say to folks is, whether or not we participate in politics will participate with us. I heard Senator Bullard say this many a time. He was actually the first person I heard say this. If you're not at the table, then best believe you're on the menu, right? So Voting is our opportunity to say that we have a voice. Now, we do understand that after we vote, we do have to hold folks accountable. But there are people like Senator Bullard in the new Florida majority that are holding folks accountable once they get elected. And we do know that everybody can't make it to council meetings. Everybody can't make it to Tallahassee. Everybody can't make it to their local county commission meetings. But you can help us get the right people there who, when Senator Bullard and new Florida majority says and puts pressure on them to do things, that they will listen. So we can help elect the people who will listen, that will help the people who do the work. So we're not asking everybody to become super woke or super any. We're just saying, please vote. Vote because it matters. Vote because it allows the folks who do the work to have some strength. And an amendment 2, because that's the amendment for the minimum wage, I think is crucial.
Yeah.
It's crucial that people have the ability to, at the very least, have a living wage. I think it's crucial that a mother of 2 can work 40 hours as opposed to having to work 70 hours just to try to make a living. There are parts of Florida where minimum wage, you can't afford to live on that. Like, you just actually can't. It's not a living wage at all. In Miami-Dade County, I don't know where you can rent an apartment making 46 cents. In Broward County, I don't know where you can live. And I mean, in Central Florida, I don't know where people can live making $8.46 an hour. And a lot of times when folks are telling us, again, back to these celebrities, on how we should vote based on their $1 million tax bills, that ain't my problem.
Right. Exactly.
But it absolutely is not. And it's the day before election. So we still have folks knocking on doors. We still got folks calling. And yes, we still got folks texting you if you have not voted. So I'm going to hop off and I'm just going to tell everybody, if you haven't voted, please make sure you vote tomorrow. If you have voted, reach out to your friends. Vote like your life depends on it, because it absolutely does. We are counting on you. And Black people, stand up.
Thank you so much for joining us, Katia. And if I can spend a little more time with you, Senator, that would be great. Thank you so much. So yes, she tapped on some really good points there. I know that's one of the things I've been completely frustrated about, is this idea that we are focused on wealthy people's problems versus our everyday problems. Because I know one of my complaints has been, I hear a lot of people talk about he's done so much for the economy, or this current administration has done so much for the economy. I have not felt that. So that's why I guess I go back to this. What is it I'm supposed to be looking at that has clearly missed me and people like me, that suggests that this economy has grown in a way that I see great opportunity for me and my community? What is it I'm missing? Where's the economy line?
Well, I think a simple baseline is based on how you feel. Like, I'm not discounting, money in your pocket or things of that nature. But oftentimes when we think about the presidency of the United States, you're not going to feel, per se, a direct correlation between who's holding that office and what you're feeling or what you're getting at your hyper local level. What I would say, though, for the individual is kind of just substantively for Black people. Do you feel safer now, in these last 4 years than you did 4 years ago? Because, you can have all the money in the world, but if somebody who doesn't look like you feels empowered to take your life and subsequently will not be arrested for doing so, is that where you want, what I'm saying? Or do you want a sense of accountability? Talk about the notion of home ownership. When people can actually say that there is such a thing as redlining, and that banks have for decades gotten away with the idea that they can charge more interest to a group of folks living in a particular zip code based on where they live and based on that zip code, and it be legal. And then someone comes along and says, well, I have no problem supporting a Supreme Court justice who's okay with that.
Right.
Like this current Supreme Court justice, where we should be outraged as a community, is one of the questions she asked, and one of the issues she weighed in on is, does the use of the N-word in a workplace create a hostile work environment? And her conclusion was, it does not.
Right.
I want you to think about that, right? Like
for her, it doesn't. But
right,
what
for her, if she would call the N-word in a work environment, it's like, oh, well, I'm not, so keep on moving, right? Let me punch the clock, right?
Exactly.
But think about that level or that lack of empathy by somebody, and think about the empathy that becomes created when someone's presented with that, i.e. the president. Like, okay, here's a red flag that might come up in her appointment. How do you feel about that? And it's like, it's not a deal breaker. And that has been this administration's thing as it relates to race, class, and economics. Is like, yeah, oh, Black people are getting hurt disproportionately in this pandemic. No big deal. You know what I mean? Oh, pre-existing conditions being eradicated. Who would that impact most? Oh, communities of color. No big deal, right? At PPP loans, we're not going to necessarily regulate who gets them versus who doesn't get them, so that when the first round of stimulus goes out and Black businesses are like, well, I wasn't notified, I couldn't apply, and I'm getting beat out by, struggling businesses like the Los Angeles Lakers, right? You know what I mean?
But they really could do some kind of cutting salaries, and they'd be fine.
Yeah, and it's that kind of, what I'm saying, like, you got to think about like, it was so amazing to hear that, because the amount of money that they received was like maybe like a third of like LeBron's salary. Right. And you're just like, like, seriously? Whereas, what I'm saying, whereas a local small business in Miami, a local restaurant could have taken 50,000 of that and would have been
efficient. Exactly.
So those kinds of things that become a thing. I mean, and I know we're talking business specifically, so I want to get into some brass tacks just to give an apples to apples comparison. When the SBA under President Obama existed, Small Business Administration existed, and we were in a similar situation with the economic crisis. They looked at their definition of what a small business was. And the federal definition is 250 employees or less, right? When we're thinking small business, we're thinking like 20 employees or less, 10 employees or less. And so for somebody like that to try and be on par, so what the Obama administration intentionally did was require the SBA look at a needs-based assessment for small businesses to make sure that, corporations basically couldn't say that our individual stores are franchises, which is how they got around it, right? Exactly. We're saying that this store only employs 200 people, so this store is a small business. So we're now encouraging every store to apply for a loan. Exactly. The Obama administration said, we're not going to let you do that because we know that there are actual small businesses out here looking at it, and we're intentional around it. And that's why, it gets under my skin when people say, well, what did they do for Black people? It's like that. Those kinds of things are important. The intentionality and understanding of the systems and how the systems don't work for folks are important. So that's what they do in one case. When you're looking at this president, he said, well, anybody who wants it can get it. So you would literally have cases of individuals who apply for PPP loans, Black people, mind you, right, who did not need them, right, and are now about to fight court battles because now they're going back and being like, okay, we probably shouldn't have given that to you based on the napkin you wrote down on that this is why you needed it. and now the administration's like, all right, we gave it to you. If you got it, we'd like it back. But if you don't, you're on your own in terms of fighting now these court battles that are coming your way. The IRS is coming for you. It's like, my bad. We were just trying to help out. You know what I mean?
And that's the concern too, is like, how is this going to impact us in IRS? But it's funny, many of us that I knew, we sort of needed the money. So you couldn't toot your nose up at it. But by the same token, I was like, I'm gonna be very cautious with this because I was one of the recipients. Right. But I need to be very cautious of this because somehow this is going to come back and bite me in a way And still today, I keep getting dangled this. If you don't fill out the application for loan forgiveness, well, I don't know. I've never received an application for loan forgiveness. So it's really a very disorganized process, but unstable. It wasn't really, in my opinion, designed to really support small businesses as much as to help larger businesses figure out a way to get some more money funnel into their coffers.
But it's funny because unstable is the way I would describe the person who issued the loans in the first place, right? So
that's a whole nother show. That's
it's part and parcel. It's part and parcel. You said the term unstable. I just want people to think about that as you walk into the voting booth.
Because that was not going to. It was not designed to be helpful. But okay, and I loved also the statement where you made, we got to get past these models that we put out there that are supposed to help. I think, honestly, I really think that's where we need to have a real coming to Jesus. And I know we're having this whole conversation about really undoing some of the models that may have in many cases been well intended, but may not be really serving real growth and wealth when it comes to our communities. And I think those are conversations we really need to have. Now, there's also been conversation, and actually I've been pretty impressed by this, of folks in our community not only talking about the national election, but the local and the state elections as well, and how important those were. I remember as a younger person, I was all proud of voting for my first president. And, my next door neighbor who was in politics was like, that's great, but you do know your local and state elected official has the greatest impact on your life. It was almost like he just hit me in my face. It never occurred to me. Like, it's, again, as smart as I think I am, I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So that makes perfect sense. So can you talk a little bit about, looking at the whole ballot, not just the president, but where are there impacts that can affect us on a state level and a local level, and how are we to look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think two of the most important things, especially at the local level, I mean, economics always being important, especially at the local level, meaning that, you don't want to elect mayoral administrations or city council people that are really going to block your blessings at the local level, right? Like, if you're still trying to open a brick and mortar space in Miami Gardens, you want to make sure that the right mayor and council people are there that are making a pathway for you to do that. But two other areas that I think are critically important are, of course, the environment and the criminal justice space, right? And let's use Miami-Dade County as an example. What a lot of people still don't realize to this day, unfortunately, is that 2 years ago, the state basically mandated that Miami-Dade has to elect a sheriff in 4 years, right? Like, that passed. A lot of people are like, what? And a lot of people are still going to be like, what? When you're going to see, 2-3 years from now, some random person talking about they want to run for sheriff of Miami-Dade County, and people are going to be scratching their head. And this is oftentimes where we kind of get left in the dark. And I say we as a community, because that person, depending on the kind of space that we create, socioeconomically, et cetera, is going to basically say, I want to run for sheriff to lock more people up.
Right.
And Black folks, we like to contribute sometimes to our own demise. Well, you'll have people be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Lock up all the criminals, lock up all the bad people, lock up this, lock up that, lock up this. And it's like, you do know they're basically saying you. They're talking about Black people need to continue being, and we know the numbers, we know the statistics in terms of the disproportionality of Black people being arrested, Black people being incarcerated, length of sentencing, like all that is real. I don't want to start there, right, folks? The criminal justice system has exploited us, enormously.
Right.
And if we're not at the table in terms of restructuring what that looks like between now and 2024, you're going to get a sheriff who has no problem locking up more of your sons and daughters and friends and neighbors in your particular community. When it comes to the environment, it's the same thing. Like, we don't take it for, we don't think about it until you look at a place like Little Haiti in Miami, right? The reason that you're seeing Black people, the traditional Black communities being pushed out of Little Haiti has everything to do with the environment. It has those folks who used to live on the beach are tired of walking out to ankle deep water. And they're thinking strategically that, okay, if the beach washes away in 50 years or 100 years, what's the next beachfront property?
Right.
Right. So let's just move a little further east and move those people out the way.
Absolutely.
So that when it happens, no big deal. And so what you're going to see,
so easy to do. Yeah.
And so I just need people to kind of think about the game of chess that's been played with your life up until this point, and whether or not you're skilled enough as a chess player yourself to anticipate the next move. But I got to give, shout out to folks like, unsung heroes like Terry Elliott and Cuthbert Hayward, Harwood, who are buying up 18th Avenue, buying up 15th Avenue, because they know they're like if they're coming for Northeast 2nd Avenue, just give it some time. They're going to come for 7th Avenue. They're going to come for 10th Avenue. They're going to come for 12th, 18th. All these traditional like Liberty City, Miami Gardens streets that we've become so synonymous with the Black community. Somebody's going to come for those. And so if you're a Black person, making an investment in those communities is essential, so you don't end up looking at Wynwood and being like, wasn't this once Overtown? Be like, yeah, it was, but we didn't do what we need to do, right?
And we won't even call it that anymore. We've got specific signs that makes it very clear that one's one and one's the other. You're right. You're not based in Overtown, so that's one of those sensitive subjects. But with the voting, and I think this might be also very key. We have a tendency, I know in the state of Florida, of lumping a lot of ballot items together. I feel in some way to try maybe overshadow or push through some certain things that we might not want to vote on. When did that become a thing, and when will we stop that? There are very clear amendments that are subject to a subject at a time. Why are we doing that? Like that doesn't, and that's where that sheriff thing could have come to be. We're voting for that, but there were 30 different things in the subject line.
Right. What I would remind folks, and I don't know when this trend happened, but it used to be where if we didn't understand something, we were just like, I'm not voting for this because I don't know what it is. But then it shifted to not voting no on it, to not voting for it, to now for some reason 2 years ago we just voted yes on everything. And that's a habit that voters in general, not just Black voters specifically, but everybody needs to get out of. Like if you see something and it sounds a little I don't know, bubble no, because what a no vote means is that at least it stays as you know it to be. Like it doesn't change. And then if someone wants to come back later on and bring that back up, then let's talk about it, because things that are easy or should be easy are going to be explained relatively easy. Take the minimum wage amendment, right? Like it's like, here's what it is. We're trying to increase the minimum wage. Here's how it's going to be done. That's what the amendment says, right? So you vote yes on it. You got amendments now on there where people are just like, well, what is this one about the open primaries? Do we want open primaries? Do we not want open primaries? It's like, on this one, read it through, because if it only applies to 3 offices, that should make it a little suspect for you, right? Like, think about it. It's like this basically only applies to the governor, the cabinet, and state legislators. So everything about that sounds shady,
right?
Because it doesn't include mayors, doesn't include anything else,
but
just those 3 offices, right? So if it gives you a sense of pause or a sense of concern, vote no. It's okay to vote no. Just like we tell our kids, it's okay to say no if something makes you uncomfortable. It's also okay to vote no if something makes you uncomfortable.
Especially if you're in a private booth, they're not going to know anyway. So what difference does it make?
Right.
So,
but I got to stress that because people say like, well, I don't know it, so I'll skip over it. And that's what you don't understand is like, if everybody skips over it and 6 people vote for it, it's still going to come out, well, 100% of voters voted for it, right?
mhm.
You'd be like, but wait, I didn't vote for that. I'd be like, but 6 people did. And you decided to skip it because you thought, if I skip it, that's the move. No, if it's uncomfortable for you, vote no. But this is why we stress making and planning to vote, is that you've had time to now look at your own ballot. You can personalize your ballot on the website. They're sending you these papers to go through all these different questions and figure out who you want to vote for. But it never ceases to amaze me that people are still like, I don't know what to vote for. I don't know what to do. And it's like, I need you to have a little more ownership over like your livelihood.
And do a little reading and yeah. I agree. So I really want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been I will be honest, sort of a stressful time for me. And I am sitting on pins and needles until tomorrow. And I know you're very, very busy. So I really thank you so much for joining us today to kind of break this down a little bit. Any support I can provide after November 3rd, definitely reach out to us because we want to make sure we are helping to support folks in our community, my community, and definitely small businesses as well. So thank you again, and we will talk to you soon.
Indeed. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We won't show any more shows this week, but we'll be back next week. So stay tuned on Talking Business, and you will definitely be able to see our next guest. Please go vote tomorrow. We need you to go out and vote. It doesn't matter who you're voting for, but we want you to really exercise your civic right. And especially if you are African American, it is almost mandatory that you do so to honor those who fought to allow us the right to do it. So thank you again. We'll see you soon. Love you all and have a great week and weekend.